Hey there, this is Jennifer from Scrapping Under the Influence. Today we are going to make a very quick project. We're going to do a little tic-tac-toe set. So this is for, if you've never been on a Disney cruise, there's this whole thing that gets done between different cabins. It's not anything that's sanctioned by Disney. It's not arranged by Disney. It literally comes from fish extender or from Facebook groups. They do this thing called a fish extender, and basically outside your cabin there's like either a fish or a seahorse that is like this little clip thing that they use to put messages on, like, or if you have tickets for something or whatever while you're on the ship. And at some point people started making these little hangers to put on those doors, and then signing up for groups where you do what they call fish extender gifts. And you sign up in a group, you get assigned, however many cabins, and then you make or buy cute little gifts for them for their fish extender. So for this one, and I've got a couple more that I'm going to do before the cruise. Our cruise is actually over Halloween. I am going to start off, first project that I'm going to do for that is going to be this little tote bag. Very simple. Cut the bag with the maker using some heat transfer. And then I also did the little cabochons, the little pieces to play tic-tac-toe with. So we have Mickey's glove and Mickey's pants. And I did actually cut those with the Cricut and then Mod Podge them on the back of these little jewelry cabochons. So I'll show you all of that. So let's get going. Okay, so we have the iron on, shiny side down, heat transfer vinyl, that is, on the mat, ready to start cutting that. I've of course mirrored the image in Design Space so that it will cut backwards, because of course when we iron it down it's flipped over. While I'm doing that, I'm actually making all of the little pieces for the, what do you want to call it? The tic-tac-toe game. It's been a long morning. So what I'm doing to make these is I'm just taking these little clear cabochons that I got on Amazon, like 100 of them for like $6 or something. They're for jewelry, technically. And then I'm just putting a thin layer of glossy Mod Podge. And then I'm putting down my little decoration that's going on there, okay, and setting that aside. Once that first layer dries, you see how it dries clear? That's why you need the gloss Mod Podge, not the matte, because the matte ends up drying with kind of a, you can tell the difference here. This one was with the matte, see how there's kind of like a, I don't know, it's not as clear when it dries. This one was done with the gloss Mod Podge, and it looks much better, and that one's not even totally dry yet. But once you've got that on there and it has dried, then all I'm doing is just going over the back of that again with some more of the Mod Podge, just to kind of seal that on there, making sure I'm getting around the edges really good, because this is going to a little kid to play with. So while this is cutting, I am going to go ahead and just keep getting these put together, and then when we get to the fabric cutting, we'll talk about that for a second. Okay, so now my iron-on, my HTV has cut. Getting the mat, or the fabric on the mat, getting ready to cut the actual little bags that the HTV is going to go on, that we're then going to sew into the little drawstring bags that all of our little tic-tac-toe pieces are going to go in. One thing to keep in mind, and I know I've said this before, with the pink fabric mats, you don't want to touch this adhesive part of it with your hands, okay? The oils from your hands will make that break down a lot faster. These are, like, the stickiness on these is, oh, whoops, I'm going to change that blade, is totally different than your normal mats. There's fuzz all over that blade. It's totally different than the normal mats, and you have to be a lot more careful with this pink one than you do with, you know, the regular green grip mats or the light grip blue mats. So, you know, you don't want to condition this mat, you know, how you do with, like, with the green mats, because they're, you know, a little over sticky, that you kind of will sit and, you know, put your hands all over it, or tap it on your jeans or your t-shirt or whatever. You do not with this pink fabric mat. You don't want to do that. When it's, and that's the other thing too, you don't need to get every little string and piece of fuzz and everything off of this once you've cut your project and you're lifting this up and peeling it off. You know, to go sew or put the next piece of fabric on, because the rotary blade cuts like this, it rolls as opposed to dragging through the fabric. It doesn't matter if there's fuzz. It's not going to cause that blade to hang up because it's not dragging. It's actually rolling and cutting while it rolls. So if you've got fuzz on this, it doesn't matter. The only time you start worrying about the fuzz and strings and whatnot that are left is if it gets to where your fabric doesn't want to stick. And when that happens, all I do is I take these upstairs, I wash them with warm water and Dawn dish soap. Usually I just run the water on it for a few minutes. It kind of helps all that fuzziness to kind of like loosen up. I just go over it with the Dawn dish soap with a little scrubby thing, and not like a rough scrubby. It's what is it? It's that little OXO, like, looks like a mushroom. We call it the mushroom brush upstairs, but little dish brush thing that holds the soap in there. And I just go over it with that, and then I hang them up to dry. And once they're dry, I just put their protective cover back on them, and they're good to go. I've got a couple over here from when I did the quilt that I need to actually go upstairs and wash. That I think I've probably taken them up and washed them probably 4 or 5 times. And once they dry, they're like good as new. Like, you would never know that, you know, it's an older mat that that you've done that with. Okay, so we're ready to cut some of these bags. So, changing my settings on Design Space to fabric, and I've left this the full width of the fabric, just because it's only going to cut to about right here by the time it cuts out the 3 of them, and then I can just pull those off and then reposition this to cut the next group of them, and I'm not going to end up wasting a bunch of fabric. So, you know, that's one of the things to kind of keep in mind, is you can leave that fabric hanging off the end of the mat. So I'm going to get this cutting. I also, when I designed this in Design Space, I did actually put I do have it drawing a seam allowance on here, just because, you know, I figure that might be helpful to some people. I know sometimes with me, you know, I wish I had it on like quilt patterns, because I am not the best when it comes to sewing, which you guys will get to see firsthand when we actually go to sew this together here in a minute. But I'm learning, and I'm getting better the more I do it. So, you know, that is really cool. I just absolutely love that you have that option with the Cricut, because you have that washable pin. You know, that a lot of the projects out there, specifically like the simplicity ones, like the different little bags and the stuffed animals and, you know, that kind of thing, that they do have that option on there, because it comes in so handy. And it really is one of my favorite features as far as, you know, using the maker for sewing and that kind of thing. So it's going to be finished writing here in just a second, and then it's going to start to cut, and then we can move on to sewing this little sucker together. Okay, so we've cut the first group of the bags, and I am just going to pull this fabric off of here. And you'll notice it's fraying, which granted, this is like ultra cheap Walmart fabric because, you know, it's $3 a yard, and if this project didn't work out the way I wanted it to, no big loss. But you'll see on here how it's frayed a little ways into our project, but it should be okay because we can just fold this over and line it up and see, okay, our seam allowance is going to be right there. It's not into our seam allowance on the other side. So really that's fine. It happens. It's not a big deal. And it seems to happen worse for two things. One, cheap fabric, which, you know, nothing wrong with cheap fabric. A lot of times there's really cute cheap fabric, but this is one of the things you run into. And then the other thing too, where this is a brand new fabric mat, that's going to cause a little bit of a stickiness to it. Where on earth did that come from? That's going to cause a little bit of stickiness or fraying, that's what I'm trying to say, fraying, that you wouldn't necessarily have if you've been using this particular mat for a while. There are some tweezers that you can get. I have them. They just are not over here right this second. That you can actually use to sit and pick these fibers and things off of here if you wanted to. But honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's not gonna hurt your project to leave them on there. It's not gonna, you know, cause something not to cut right like it does with the paper, you know, which we all know, of course, that with the paper you got to get all those little pieces and parts off, otherwise it causes the blade to hang up as it cuts the paper. So I am going to cut the next group of these, and then we'll start sewing. Okay, we're ready to sew this thing together. So what I've done is I've taken this and pressed this top flap where the drawstring is going to go. I've pressed that over so it's down by the seam line. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this a little bit differently than you would typically do something with a drawstring. I'm actually going to put my string in here before I sew it, simply because I'm using all of this little tiny baker's twine, because I have like a ton of it. You have no idea. That's what I'm going to use for my drawstring, and that's partially too because I don't know, it just seems like it's a little bit more fun than, you know, yarn or cording or something like that. I'm just going to clip those in place, and then I'm going to put it up here, and I'm going to sew this shut. Okay, so actually that's just a touch. Okay, all right, so we're going to sew along here, and we're going to keep that edge of the fabric along the left edge of the presser foot. That's how we're going to keep our seam allowance where we want it to be. This is actually the first time I've used this machine. I just got it last week. It was one that was featured on HSN the week before for their National Sewing Day or Sewing Month or something. I honestly am not sure. I don't quite know how I found it. I think something popped up on Crafter's Companion, because I have the Gemini and I have a number of their dyes that I just have not had time to really get into and play with as much as I would like. But they were on there talking about, you know, they were going to have the Gemini and their quilting block set, which quite honestly, if I didn't have the maker, I probably totally would have bought it, because it's pretty dang cool. Okay, so that didn't cut. Weird. Okay, so got that cut.
or sewn, I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take this back over. I'm just going to fold this in half. Get those out of the way. And I'm going to press this in half, and then we're going to sew the edge and the bottom of this. Okay, so that's pressed. Now we're just going to do the exact same thing, only this time now we're going to sew on top of our line that the Cricut drew for our seam allowance, and so that will make it incredibly easy to sew. Okay, let's get going. Now when I started this one, you'll notice I didn't backstitch this one because where it's kind of down in that bottom corner, it's not really going to be necessary, but when we get up to the top here, we are actually going to do that. So turn that, sew up this side. Okay, so what I'm going to do when I get up here at the very, very top, I'm going to kind of keep my finger right here where I can feel that twine inside that's for our drawstring. I'm going to kind of watch, and then we're going to backstitch. Okay, doesn't want to cut. I wonder why. So this thing has a little button on here to cut your thread when you're finished, which I thought was incredibly cool. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go just on the other side of the right side of my corner stitch, and I'm just going to kind of cut that corner so that when we turn our bag, we're going to have, actually I need to do it on the other corner too. As you can tell, I don't do this very often. This is why I've stuck to the quilts lately, because, I've started doing the quilts because it's a little more forgiving. Okay, so we're going to push our points out, which I could do this with my fingernail. I don't want to. I'm going to use my little dowel stick that kind of lives over here now. And then there we have our little bag. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to weed our HTV, and we're going to iron our little tic-tac-toe grid on here. We're going to tie this off at the end here into a nice little knot so that the string can't get pulled out of the bag. And there you go. There's your drawstring. Okay, let's get some HTV on this. Okay, so we've got our bag, we've got our HTV. We're going to line that up, make sure everything looks good. Before I do that, however, I am actually going to just kind of give this a quick press to get it good and flat. That's better. And then it's really just a matter of deciding what side you want your drawstring on. I'm going to leave mine there on the right. And then we're just going to line this puppy up. I know a lot of people like measure and do all this. Yeah, I just eyeball it. And most of the time, it comes out about right. Okay, so this is a cotton poly blend, the fabric is, which means it's going to go at 305 for 20 seconds with the Easy Press. And here we go. And I know I've said this before, but honestly, the Easy Press, I don't know that I would have tried HTV were it not for this, not to the extent that I have. And quite honestly, it's so much fun. I absolutely love it. It's just the coolest thing ever. Okay, so whoops. Stuck to the Easy Press. There we go. Okay. And there's our finished tic-tac-toe bag. So we will just fill this with our little cabochons that have Mickey's glove and Mickey's pants, and there is my fish extender ready to go.